Welcome back to Apple Addiction. The MacBook Pro M1X that is coming in 2021 will feature the most significant design overhaul to the MacBook Pro line that we've seen since 2016. And the updated machines will also address complaints that users have had with the MacBook Pro for years by bringing back older features that include more ports, physical function keys, and much more. So in this video, we are going to discuss MacBook Pro M1X. You should wait for it. Here is why. The video is going to be amazing, so make sure you stick to the end. Before starting the video, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to never miss out on any of our videos. Release date. When it comes to the release, the M1X MacBook Pros are expected to be released in September 2021. Specs. Mark Gurman reported that Apple will be launching 2 new chips in 2021. Chip 1 will launch in the summer, and this will have 10 CPU cores, from 8 that the M1 had, as well as 16 and 32 GPU cores from the 7 and 8 that the M1 had. On top of that, the chip will support up to 64 GB of memory, as opposed to just 16 that the M1 currently supports. And then the second chip will launch by the end of the year, so likely in November, and this will be an 8-core processor with a 9 to 10-core GPU, as opposed to 7 to 8 of the M1. However, we do not yet know what the maximum amount of supported memory is on the chip. We can predict Chip 1 to be called the M2, just because of how big the improvements are over the M1, and then Chip 2 to be called something like M1S or M1T or M1X. However, we have seen some recent reports saying that Chip 1 will actually be called the M1X, as this will be essentially an M1 with more core and 0 architectural changes, while Chip 2 will be called M2, and it will feature higher clock speeds than the M1 and a brand new architecture as well. The M1X is what both the 14 and the 16-inch Pros are set to feature. Now, Apple could go about this in 2 ways. They could either give us the exact same configuration options for both the 14 and the 16 inches, or they could restrict some of the higher-end options, such as the 32-core GPU or the 64 GB of RAM, to the 16-inch MacBook Pro. But even if the 14-inch only has a 16-core GPU and 32 GB of RAM, it could still be up to twice as fast GPU-wise as the M1 MacBook Pro was. The M1 MacBook Pro score is just over 20,000 points in the Geekbench compute. The 16 inches would have 5500M graphics score is just over 35,000, which means that a new 14-inch with 16-core GPU could score as high as 40,000 points, outperforming the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and then the new 16 inches could score up to 80,000 points, which would outperform even the top-of-the-line 27-inch Mac, would have 5700 XT GPU, which scores just over 72,000 points. But that's not all. Aside from the GPU improvements, the CPU isn't just getting to the extra core, is in fact out of those 10 cores. 8 will now be high-performance cores, as opposed to just 4 like we have with the M1, which means that we could potentially see up to 2 times the multi-core performance compared to the M1, making the M1X significantly more powerful overall than the M1 was. Battery. But performance is nothing without great battery life. The M1X MacBook Pro offered up to a 20-hour battery life. Now, the only battery life fleet that we've had in terms of these new MacBook Pros comes from Luke Miani, who claims that we could see a battery life between 23 to 30 hours, according to his source, which is nuts. Now, something that you should be aware of is that the M1X also drops the efficiency core from 4 to 2, which in theory would mean that we would get a better battery life, of course. But what you're not doing is anything intensive that would normally make use of the high-performance core, is we could potentially see lower performance than on an M1 Mac. And keep in mind, the M1X is not set to offer any clock speed improvements at all over the M1, which means that we would essentially get a dual-core low-performance processor with the M1X, instead of a quad-core low-performance processor with the M1. But its improved battery life could also be a result of Apple dropping to energy-efficient cores. Now, the full internal redesign also means that Apple could have more room inside for a larger battery, so the chances of these MacBooks featuring an improved battery life over the already great 20 hours of the M1 MacBook Pro. Price. So even though we haven't really had any price leaks or rumors on this, we do predict the 14 inches to start from $1,800, replacing the current Intel model pricing, and then the 16 inches to start from $2,400, replacing the current 16-inch model. At these prices, we predict the 14 inches to feature a 16-core GPU, 512 GB of storage, and 16 GB of RAM, with the 16-inch featuring the exact same. Display. When we open up the lids, we get to see the beautiful 14-inch display, which is increased in size from the current 13.3-inch panel. The bezels are much thinner now, with the display also appearing to be taller, which would mean that we would have the very first aspect ratio change since ever on a MacBook Pro. On top of that, the MacBook Pro branding seems to have been removed entirely, which is something that we did see reported by other sources as well. The display, however, is likely going to remain an LCD panel as opposed to the brand new mini LED that we've seen leaked before, as Apple is having some manufacturing issues with the new mini LED technology, a reason why we only got it on the 12.9-inch iPad Pro and not the 11 inches as well. And speaking of that, the 12.9 inches of Pro is seeing some significant delays when it comes to shipping dates. The mini LED display is only set to be adopted with next year's refresh of these MacBook Pros, and having seen the 12.9 inches mini iPad Pros in person, for the most part, you will not be able to tell the difference, as the mini LED brightness only comes in effect when you're watching HDR content. So you won't be able to tell the difference when you're just using your device normally. At least this is how it is on your iPad Pro. The black levels are indeed much better on the mini panel, but we never thought that Apple's LCD displays were bad in the first place, so we honestly do not think that you should hold off just because of that mini LED display. We honestly think that if you really need any MacBook Pro, you should get this one instead of waiting for another year just for that mini LED display. Keyboard and trackpad. Now the keyboard is actually getting some pretty big changes, as we do no longer get a touch bar. According to Ming-Chi Kuo, the ever-changing touchscreen band is being replaced by a set of physical keys, presumably like the ones found on other laptops and pre-2016 MacBooks. Another analyst group, Display Supply Chain Consultants, has issued its own report, predicted the demise of the touch bar. The report claimed, "We expect touch bars to be exceeded by tablets when Apple starts the adoption of the 10.9-inch AMOLED iPad." Now, this has been reported before a number of times that Apple had prototypes without a touch bar, and judging by how bad the touch bar was, now, since the touch bar is going away, we do get the function keys back. We have the two brightness keys like before, we have the mission control key, the launchpad key has now been replaced by a spotlight search key, and then the rest of the keys are the same as before. We also get a brand new Touch ID button, which looks identical to the one we got with the iMac, just in black. And the circle seems to be identical to an iPhone's Touch ID home button, which makes me think that Apple is actually reusing parts here. All the function keys now have a full key size, which means that there is less room left for the trackpad, which is now shorter than before. But we get more space in between the keys, as this will make the typing experience even better than it is now. And of course, the fact MagSafe is expected to return is another big win. Switching MacBooks to USB-C ports had a lot of advantages, especially since the rest of the industry followed Apple's example. What is your opinion about the MacBook Pro M1X? Let us know your opinion in the comment section below. This was all for today. Hope you liked the video. Do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Stay safe, and we will be back soon with another video.